Okay, so, you sent in the stuff about chapter 20 from that BFG handbook, the Christian version of the Tao Te Ching, and those renewal and respond sections too. And it's all about, what it means to be a disciple of Jesus through this kind of different lens.
Yeah, a really unique perspective.
Yeah, and I think, what we're aiming for here is to distill it down to those really key insight.
The core.
Yeah, the core nuggets of wisdom.
Yeah.
And make it something that's really accessible and, doesn't take hours to digest, but still has that aha moment.
Exactly. Bite-sized wisdom, but still deep.
Yeah, exactly.
So what's really cool about this material is how it kind of blends Christian gospel ideas with
Taoism.
Taoism. Yeah. At the heart of Taoism is this emphasis on simplicity and going with the flow, being in harmony with nature.
Right.
So it brings this whole other layer to these, maybe familiar Christian themes.
It's like a fresh perspective.
Totally. And then you've got the renewal section, which gets into the nitty-gritty of how this stuff actually plays out, in our mindset, our goals, our daily lives.
The practical application.
Exactly. And then respond kind of zooms out and looks at connections with other big world religions.
Okay, so let's jump right in.
Let's do it.
So the chapter starts with this really bold statement. It says, refrain from pointless learning and your troubles will end.
Right out the gate.
Yeah, whoa, hold on. What's pointless learning?
Yeah, that's the big question, right?
It makes you think, what are they really getting at here? And it reminds me of that passage in the Bible in 1 Corinthians, I think it is, where it talks about how, sometimes knowledge puffs us up, but it's love that actually builds us up.
Oh, yeah. That's a good connection.
So it feels like there's this warning here about getting so caught up in information that we miss out on, what really matters in life,
Absolutely. And that's really the heart of it.
Yeah.
It's not saying all learning is bad, but it's pointing us towards the kind of knowledge that really matters.
So how do we know what's pointless?
Well, the material actually references 1 Corinthians 3.19, where it says, worldly wisdom can look pretty foolish from a different perspective.
Okay, interesting.
So maybe pointless learning is that the stuff that makes us feel smart, but doesn't lead to deeper understanding or compassion or inner peace.
So it's not actually transforming us.
Exactly. It's just kind of mental clutter.
Right. And the real takeaway is that true wisdom should change us for the better, not just, fill up our heads with trivia.
100%.
Okay. So then it goes on to talk about not fearing what other people think. And it asks these questions what if people agree or disagree? What if people are good or bad? Must you fear what others fear?
Oh, I love that part.
Right. And then it says, such nonsense, how limitless. And it just hits me this idea of breaking free from that constant need for approval or that anxiety about being judged.
It's so freeing.
It is.
And if you think about it in the bigger picture, the material links this to Galatians 2.6, where it's all about how God doesn't play favorites based on human status or opinions.
Makes sense.
And it also echoes what Jesus taught in Matthew 5 about loving everyone, even those we might consider bad.
So it's about rising above all that.
Yeah, it's about realizing that our security and direction shouldn't come from the fickle whims of other people, but from something deeper and more constant.
Like a higher purpose.
Exactly, a higher form of approval.
Okay, and then there's this really vivid image. It talks about being still and quiet like a weaned child, not yet smiling.
Oh, that's such a beautiful image.
It really paints a picture, doesn't it? This sense of peaceful contentment, complete dependence.
Called trust.
Yeah, and the connection to Psalm 131 is so spot on.
Yeah.
Thinking about a weaned child, they're not anxiously searching for their mother's milk anymore. They've found satisfaction and rest. And it's suggesting that as disciples, we can find that same peace and fulfillment in God instead of always chasing after the next thing the world is offering.
It's about having that deep, settled trust.
Exactly. Okay, and then it presents this contrast. It talks about how the disciple is a fool for God.
Right.
Maybe even muddled or slow compared to ordinary people who seem so clever and intelligent by the world's standards.
It's like the world has it all backwards.
Totally. And the material even references 1 Corinthians 4, where the apostles were seen as fools for following Christ.
Which is so interesting because it highlights how God's wisdom often looks foolish to the world and vice versa.
It's a totally different way of thinking.
Right. It's not about being practically unintelligent, but it's about valuing a different kind of wisdom, the spiritual understanding that might not always make sense logically.
It's about prioritizing the things that really matter.
Exactly.
Okay, and then there's this part about drifting aimless in the wind without boundaries, which at first sounds kind of negative.
Yeah. I can see that.
But then it brings in these references from Isaiah and Psalms about God guiding and rescuing, and even John 3 about the Spirit moving freely.
Right. It puts a whole new spin on that aimlessness.
Yeah, it's like it's not about being lost. It's more about being carried by a current that knows where it's going, even if we don't.
Like surrendering to something bigger than ourselves.
And the key insight is that sometimes our attempts to control everything actually limit us.
It's like we're getting in our own way.
Right, but when we trust in a greater leading, it can take us to places we never expected.
To better destinations.
Yeah. And lastly, this idea of refusing the world and choosing nourishment from God above, that really resonates with those verses in John 15 about not belonging to the world and 1 John about not loving the things of the world.
There's definitely a consistent thread there.
Right. And it highlights this crucial choice for a disciple.
Yeah, where are we looking for validation? Where are we finding our sustenance?
And the material suggests that the world offers these fleeting satisfactions, but the real lasting nourishment comes from connecting with God.
It's about recognizing that the world's values and priorities can actually pull us away from that deeper, more fulfilling source.
Okay, so those are like the big overarching themes, and now the material moves into this renewal section and this idea of mindset, and it presents these 7 key shifts that we need to make.
7 key shifts.
Yeah, so the first one is focusing on God's wisdom, and it ties back to avoiding that pointless learning we were talking about, and it references James 1.5 about asking God for wisdom.
So it's about actively seeking God's perspective.
Right, making divine wisdom our like main pursuit.
Instead of getting caught up in all the noise and worldly philosophies.
Exactly. The second shift is rejecting fear and the opinions of others.
Which we were just talking about.
Yep, and this one points to Galatians 1.10 about seeking God's approval over human approval.
So it's about cultivating that inner conviction that's rooted in faith.
Right. So we're not so easily swayed by what everyone else is saying or doing.
Or by our own anxieties about fitting in.
Yeah. The third shift is cultivating stillness.
Stillness.
And this connects with that beautiful image of the weaned child, and it references Psalm 46.10, "Be still and know that I am God."
Love that one.
It's such a powerful reminder, especially in our world that's always go, go, go. You know, making space for stillness is not just a nice idea. It's like this fundamental practice for really connecting with and understanding God.
It's essential.
The fourth shift is embracing humility.
Humility.
And this one's linked to that idea of being a fool for God. And it references 1 Corinthians 1.27-28 about how God chooses what seems foolish to the world.
It's about recognizing our limitations.
Yeah, and seeing God's power in all of it.
Exactly. And realizing that true wisdom often comes from a place of humility.
The fifth shift is trusting God's will.
Trusting.
And this connects to that idea of drifting aimlessly that we were talking about. And it references Proverbs 3.5-6 about not relying on our own understanding.
Letting go of control.
Yeah, surrendering to a bigger plan even when we can't see where it's going.
Which can be really hard.
It can be, but the material suggests that it leads to this deeper peace and trust that God's way is ultimately best.
I think that's a really important point.
The sixth shift is living distinctively.
Living differently.
Yeah, and this one's tied to refusing the world, and it references Matthew 6.33 about seeking God's kingdom first.
Putting God at the center.
Right. It's about having a different set of priorities than the world.
Yeah.
You know, living in the world, but not being defined by its values.
It's about choosing a different path.
And the seventh and final shift is seeking nourishment from God.
Nourishment.
Yeah, which echoes that preference for divine sustenance. And it references John 6.35, where Jesus says, "I am the bread of life."
Beautiful.
So it's about finding our deepest satisfaction in God.
Realizing that He's the source of all that we need.
Exactly. Okay, so those are the 7 key mindsets shifts.
Okay.
And now we move into renewal aim, which outlines 7 corresponding aims.
So it takes those internal shifts and directs them outward.
Exactly. It's like the natural next step, you know?
It's like a roadmap.
So the first aim is focusing on godly knowledge. And this one's linked to avoiding pointless learning. And it references Colossians 2.8, which warns against empty philosophies.
So it's about being discerning about what we allow into our minds.
Right, being intentional about what we learn and making sure it aligns with our faith and deepens our relationship with God.
It's like a mental and spiritual diet.
Exactly. The second aim is following God's path.
Following.
And this one's connected to rejecting fear and the opinions of others, and it references Galatians 1.10 again.
It's about staying true to our convictions.
Yeah, and having the courage to step away from what everyone else is doing if we feel like God is leading us in a different direction.
Even if it's hard.
The third aim is cultivating stillness and simplicity.
Stillness and simplicity.
Yeah, and it mirrors that mindset shift. and references Psalm 46.10 again.
So it's about making stillness a regular practice.
Right. Not just something we do every once in a while, but making it a priority in our daily lives.
Making space for God.
The fourth aim is living with humility. And this one's tied to being a fool for God and references 1 Corinthians 1.27.
So it's about intentionally choosing a posture of dependence.
Yeah, acknowledging that we need God's grace and guidance in everything we do.
It's about recognizing his strength in our weakness.
The fifth aim is surrendering to God's guidance,
Surrendering.
which is connected to that idea of drifting aimlessly and references Proverbs 3.5-6 again.
Letting go of the reins.
Yeah, and it's about actively choosing to release our own plans and be open to where God might be taking us.
It's a daily decision, even a moment-by-moment decision.
The sixth aim is focusing on spiritual nourishment,
Nourishment.
which is connected to rejecting worldly pursuits and references Matthew 6.33.
Putting our spiritual growth first.
Right, recognizing that true fulfillment comes from our relationship with God and making that the center of our lives.
Instead of chasing after things that won't ultimately satisfy.
And the seventh and final aim is seeking fulfillment from God.
Fulfillment.
And this one echoes the idea of divine nourishment and references John 6.35.
It's about finding our completeness in him.
Exactly, realizing that true joy and purpose come from a vibrant relationship with God.
It's the ultimate aim.
Okay, so those are the 7 aims.
Okay.
And now we get to renewal practice, which takes all of this and grounds it in 7 practical applications.
So this is where the rubber meets the road.
Exactly. It's all about how we actually live this out day to day.
The nitty-gritty.
So the first practice is prioritizing God-centered knowledge.
Okay.
And it's linked to avoiding pointless learning. And it references Proverbs 4.7 about the value of wisdom.
Being mindful of what we feed our minds.
Right, making deliberate choices about what we learn and what we focus our attention on.
Making sure it's nourishing our faith and understanding of God.
The second practice is living authentically, and this one's connected to rejecting fear, and it references Galatians 1.10.
So it's about aligning our actions with our beliefs.
Yeah, living in a way that reflects what we say we believe, even when it's hard or when people don't understand.
Even when it goes against the grain.
The third practice is engaging in daily silence.
Daily silence.
And this one's tied to cultivating stillness and references Psalm 46.10 again.
It's about making time to be quiet.
Yeah, setting aside time each day to reflect and to listen for God's voice.
Creating space for him to speak.
The fourth practice is humbling oneself before God.
Humbling ourselves.
And it mirrors the humility mindset shift and references 1 Corinthians 1.27.
It's about recognizing our dependence on God.
Yeah, and acknowledging his authority in our lives.
That's a posture of the heart.
A fifth practice is surrendering plans to God.
Surrendering.
And this one's linked to trusting God's will and references Proverbs 3.5-6 again.
Letting go of our agendas.
Right, actively choosing to release our own plans and seek God's direction in our decisions.
Trusting that his plans are better than our own.
The sixth practice is prioritizing spiritual growth, which is connected to rejecting worldly pursuits and references Matthew 6.33.
So it's about investing in our relationship with God.
Yeah, making conscious choices that nurture our faith and help us grow spiritually.
Spending time in prayer, in scripture, in community.
And the seventh and final practice is seeking spiritual nourishment,
Seeking nourishment.
which echoes the divine sustenance theme and references John 6.35.
It's about drawing strength and fulfillment from God.
Yeah, regularly through prayer, scripture, and other spiritual disciplines.
Feeding our souls.
Okay, so those are the 7 practices.
Okay.
And now we come to the response section, which is where things get really interesting because it explores these parallels with other world religions.
And you start to see these common threads.
Exactly. So for Refrain from Pointless Learning, the material highlights how different faiths emphasize wisdom and truth.
Okay.
It brings up Romans 12.2 for Christianity,
Okay.
Quran 20.114 for Islam,
Interesting.
Buddhist teachings on how suffering can lead to wisdom,
Right.
and Bhagavad Gita 6.19 from Hinduism, which emphasizes focused awareness.
So even though the specifics are different, there's this shared idea that not all knowledge is equally valuable.
Exactly, and that true wisdom has a purpose.
It's about seeking knowledge that leads to deeper understanding or spiritual growth.
For Reject Fear and Opinions, it focuses on how different religions emphasize seeking divine approval over human approval.
Yeah.
It mentions Galatians 1.0 again for Christianity,
Right.
Quran 68.1112, which talks about not giving in to those who boast and swear a lot,
Okay.
Buddhist teachings on detachment from both praise and blame.
So it's about where we look for validation.
Exactly. Are we seeking approval from the world, or are we aligning ourselves with a higher power?
It's about finding that inner compass.
Right. And for cultivate stillness and simplicity, it talks about how different faiths value inner peace through practices like prayer or meditation.
Okay.
It mentions Psalm 46 for Christianity.
Be still and know that I am God.
32.4, which talks about the ascent of the spirit to God.
Okay.
Buddhist mindfulness practices. And Hindu meditation, specifically Bhagavad Gita 4.22, which is about transcending duality through inner peace.
So even though the methods might look different, the aim is the same.
Exactly. It's about finding that peace and connection with the divine through stillness.
It's a universal understanding of the power of quiet.
And for live with humility and dependence, it highlights how humility is seen as a key to receiving divine grace.
Okay.
It brings up 1 Corinthians 1.27 for Christianity, which reminds us that God cares for us.
Okay.
Buddhist teachings on overcoming ego.
Right.
And Bhagavad Gita 13.7, which lists humility as one of the qualities that lead to knowledge.
It's about acknowledging our limitations.
Yeah, and recognizing that we need something greater than ourselves.
Being open to receiving guidance and grace.
And for seek spiritual nourishment, it focuses on how different religions teach us to prioritize spiritual fulfillment over worldly desires.
Okay.
It mentions Matthew 4.4, which talks about the importance of spiritual food.
Right.
Quran 4.57, which promises pure sustenance in paradise. Buddhist principles of non-attachment.
Right.
And Bhagavad Gita 9.22, which promises to provide for those who are devoted to God.
So it's about recognizing that real lasting satisfaction comes from a deeper spiritual connection.
Exactly. And the response section ends with this quote from St. Thomas Aquinas: truth cannot contradict truth.
Oh, that's a good one.
It really ties it all together. These different faith traditions might look and sound very different on the surface. There's this fundamental unity underneath.
Like they're all pointing towards the same essential truths.
Exactly. So for someone like you who's looking for those quick but insightful nuggets of wisdom,
Right.
the big takeaways from this deep dive into chapter 20 and all of its related sections are really about embracing simplicity,
Simplicity.
letting go of our attachment to the world and all of its drama, and putting our trust in God.
Trusting in God's wisdom and guidance.
Exactly. It's about cultivating stillness and humility and finding our fulfillment not in the things of the world, but in our connection with God.
It's about going deeper.
And what's so cool is that this material presents these ideas in a way that's both concise and comprehensive. You get the big picture, but it doesn't overwhelm you.
Yeah, it's like a cheat sheet for spiritual growth.
Exactly. And it not only lays out what it means to be a disciple of Jesus in this really unique way, but it also connects those ideas to these broader spiritual truths. So you get those aha moments you were talking about.
It's like seeing the connections between all these different paths.
So now I want to leave you with a couple of things to ponder.
Okay.
So first, how might choosing simplicity and trust in something bigger than ourselves, how might that reshape your daily life and your priorities?
That's a good one.
And then, we've seen hints of this common thread running through all these different faith traditions. What other areas of knowledge or belief might reveal those kinds of surprising connections if we approach them with curiosity and an open mind?
It's about looking for the unity beneath the surface.
Exactly. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll see you next time.
See you later.